This week on Hell of a Picture, we continue our run on the shared works of Scorsese, De Niro, and Pesci with a rare double feature where we discuss Goodfellas and Casino as sibling films. David asked me if I think that Casino suffers primarily from being second chronologically, or if Goodfellas is just a better picture. We talk about their similarities and their differences, and where the endings leave their characters. I tell you about one of my all-time favorite cinematic moments, while Dave talks up Sharon Stone in her best performance since Total Recall. As far back as we can remember, we always wanted to be gangsters. But somehow we ended up with a podcast. Probably for the best. We'll just watch gangster movies instead. That's this week on Hell of a Picture. Welcome to Hell of a Picture, a weekly movie podcast where we discuss an unforgettable film, and if it truly is a hell of a picture. My name is Andrew Bartlett, and I'm sitting across the internet, as I do each and every week, from the Tommy DeVito to my Nicky Santoro, Mr. David Hollingsworth. How are you
we're both
this week, sir?
I'm good. We're both Joe Pesci. Is that correct?
We are both Joe Pesci. That's right.
iterations of Pesci. Really the same guy. Basically the same diminutive psychopath who, just really dominates these films with his with his lunacy. I like it.
And his presence.
I like it. And interestingly enough, I'm also playing Tommy DeVito, the quarterback, in one of our fantasy football leagues this week. So I got Tommy.
That's why you got him
fired up and ready to go. And so I'm excited to talk Tommy.
Tommy Cutlets, man. He I hope his agent is back. That like crazy weirdo with the hat, and it's gonna be great, man. Tommy DeVito.
He's straight out of Goodfellas, basically. Like it's fantastic.
He is. It's great. And it's fitting because we're talking about Goodfellas this week, and we're talking about Casino. This is our first double feature.
Whoa!
Which is pretty cool. Yeah. You got,
cool.
A little bit of a Joey Lawrence there, a Joey Lawrence reference.
I tried to go Joey there. Thank you for acknowledging
it. We're doing our first sort of double feature. We toyed with this a little bit with Dune parts 1 and 2, kind of doing like this kind of long, elongated episode. But this is really an episode where we're going to dive into the two films and how they relate to each other. So this is really exciting. We're not necessarily only going to talk about one or the other. We're going to kind of talk about them as not as one film, obviously, but like sort of how they're similar, how they're different, how Scorsese approaches different things in the films, and how the actors approach different roles. And I think at the end, we're probably going to figure out, we always pose the question if the film is a hell of a picture. I think this one is going to be more so which one is the more of a hell of a picture, if they are hell of the pictures. We'll figure that out. But Does that sound right, Dave? I think. Yeah,
I think so. We'll figure it out as we go, I guess. I sort of had. Well, yeah. I mean, I think we've both got our thoughts on the films, and whether they are or they aren't. I think the important thing is that we discuss them as a dyad of films, because they really do share so much.
Yes.
And I think it's important to discuss them as companion pieces, and that'll really be the focal point there. And I think we can both, right off the hop, we can put our cards on the table that these are awesome movies. There's a reason we're talking about them, that we chose them to discuss. As we said before, we're not talking about a lot of duds up here. So, the greatness of these films, I don't think is all that debatable. It's really just a matter of which one is better, and where they sort of stack up against one another.
Absolutely. And before we get into the rundown, I'll have to ask you, as I do every week, did you watch anything that you can recommend for our listeners and viewers this week?
Man, did I?
Besides these two movies.
Well, that's the thing, because I tried to back these, and it was a mountain I could not climb. It was I got through Goodfellas great, and I was like, okay, I took a little break, I had lunch, and I jumped right into Casino. And after about an hour, I was just like, okay, I gotta step away. So I did. I took a nap. I went to the gym. I finished Casino, and then for the rest of the week, I think I watched some basketball, and some Bob's Burgers, and that was the extent of my viewing outside of these movies. So yeah, no pictures to recommend, I'm afraid. How about you?
Yeah, there's this is the issue with doing two movies that, one run time is 3 hours, the other one is 2.5. So that's a lot of mafiosos to
yeah, that's a spicy
indulge
meatball
in a week. That's right. I started Murders in the Building. Only Murders in the Building.
Oh, good for you. Good for you. Excellent.
Loved it. Absolutely loved it. I mean, those three people I could watch. Selena Gomez, I'm just sort of like she's fine. She's really good in the series. Before this, I was sort of like, oh, whatever. Like, I'm not like a huge fan of her, but like, she's great. Mm-hmm. But Martin Short and Steve Martin, get out of here. These guys, I could watch them all day. And they're playing. Yeah. I love it how they're playing the roles. It's like they're playing the roles that people want to see them play. That they felt like, mm-hmm. like Steve Martin is sort of that sort of character from Planes, Trains, and Automobiles sort of thing. Like sort of like the snarky guy who, but like is still like lovable and still comes around or whatever. And Martin Short is that Martin Short eccentric, ridiculous person that's just kind of witty, and it's great. It's so enjoyable. But I only got through 2 episodes, so
you got a long way to go.
Slate for that. Oh, do I?
Yeah, no, it's exciting.
We're gonna get into it. So Only Murders in the Building, great show. But this week let's dive into our second episode on Scorsese films and our first double feature. Let's do the rundown, man. Let's get right into it. We got a lot to talk about this week.
Yeah, let's do it. So this will be a somewhat modified rundown, as we are doing a double feature as opposed to our typical singular feature. So, Goodfellas and Casino both allow us to live inside the mafia as they chronicle the lives of their respective leads, their families, their friends, their triumphs, and their failures. In Goodfellas, we witness the coming of age, seduction, and eventual disenchantment of Henry Hill, as he runs alongside his partners Jimmy Conway and Tommy DeVito in the New York crime scene. Casino takes us behind the velvet rope to follow the ascendancy of Sam Rothstein, a bookmaker turned casino boss in the employ of the Midwest mob based out of Kansas City. Both tales span decades, and we watch as each man gets married, starts a family, takes on the law, and even other mobsters. Unsurprisingly, not everyone makes it out of this alive. And it makes it out alive of these savagely honest, gruesomely violent, and even brutally funny mob sagas that really devised and refined the formula of a crime movie. Goodfellas and Casino were released in 1990 and 1995, respectively. They were directed, of course, by Martin Scorsese, written by Martin Scorsese and Nicholas Pileggi, and based on the books Wise Guy and Casino, Love and Honor in Las Vegas, both, of course, by Nicholas Pileggi. Goodfellas stars Ray Liotta in the lead role of Henry Hill and Lorraine Baracco as Karen Hill. It features the talents of De Niro and Pesci as Jimmy Conway and Tommy DeVito, respectively, and those two would return again in Casino to play Sam Rothstein and Nicky Santoro. They would be joined in that picture by the astounding Sharon Stone as Ginger. And naturally, both films feature a host of Scorsese mainstays like Frank Vincent, as well as Scorsese's mom, Catherine, and his brother, Charles. So it's very much a family affair for the Scorseses. As mentioned, the films were released 5 years apart and have a host of similarities. They are both mob movies. They share a cast, a director, a writer, a format, a narration style, copious amounts of cocaine, murder, and infidelity. And being that they share so much, they are often debated as a pair, and fairly or not, judged against one another, which we are going to be doing today, of course. If you were to ask most people and awards bodies, the consensus tends to favor Goodfellas. It was nominated for 6 Oscars, including Best Picture, Director, Editing, adapted screenplay, supporting actor, and supporting actress. Now, it would only win one of those, that being Best Supporting Actor for Pesci, but that is one more than Casino would win. The only nomination Casino would garner would be for Sharon Stone's performance, and she would lose that to Mira Sorvino in Mighty Aphrodite. I have not seen it, but I have difficulty imagining it was anywhere near as powerful as Sharon Stone's performance because, man, like she was a revelation here. The only thing Casino can lord over its older brother is that it did make more money. Casino took in about $116 million at the box office compared to Goodfellas' $47. As you've no doubt realized, Scorsese did not get a directorial Oscar for either of these films, nor did he win for last week's Raging Bull. Marty would continue to be denied his due until the 2007 award season, where he would win for The Departed, a film which would also win Best Picture. Now, Goodfellas can be found at number 92 on the AFI Top 100 list, and Casino can be found somewhere in the Also Ran category, keeping company with Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Godfather Part 3, and whatever other movies you can think of that are overshadowed by a predecessor. And that is your somewhat modified rundown.
Modified, yet, very thorough. And
thank you.
I think that works. Yeah.
I think so. I think basically sort of gives everyone the brief.
Exactly. I thought that she won the Academy Award for.
She did not
for Casino. Wow, that's
regrettably no. Yeah, I think so too. And there was the big winners that year. In 1990. I think was Dances with Wolves, was Braveheart. In 1990, it was Dances with Wolves. That won picture and director and a whole lot of other things. Yeah. Interestingly enough, Godfather Part 3 actually did get Coppola a directing nominee. He was nominated for Best Director for Godfather Part 3, which is kind of shocking. He was up there with Scorsese, obviously, and Costner, who ended up winning. But yeah, the 68th Oscars, they ran into Braveheart. That was a big one. And Apollo 13 and Babe and The Usual Suspects. So there were, and Leaving Las Vegas, year. Mr. Holland's Opus. Yeah, very, very good year. It was also the year that featured, I believe, we've done some 96 films, haven't we? I think we've done, I want to say Jurassic Park. No, Jurassic Park was 93, but we digress. Yeah. Point is, strong years at the Oscars. Neither of these films really came out with a whole chest full of awards, though Goodfellas obviously got its flowers in the form of nominations.
Yes. So with respect to these two films, we're discussing them as kind of this tandem today. And right off the bat, it's like they weren't made 30 years apart, sort of like these films and Irishman, which is like sort of what we'll be talking about next week, which is Scorsese's later years mafia piece, and Mean Streets, which is kind of his early years mafia piece, which was back in the 70s. So like these were made fairly close to each other, a mere 5 years apart. But do you think that Casino suffers from being second when you sort of talk about it? And Goodfellas seems to have consensus as being the better picture. That's not to say Casino isn't good, but like when you stack them up against each other.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I mentioned in the rundown, history does seem to regard Goodfellas as the superior work. It's got more awards, Critics' Choice lists. Any internet aggregate you can find is probably going to favor it by a couple of points. And most importantly, as you just said, it came first, and that counts for something.
Interesting.
Do you think it's possible? I wonder if it's possible to judge Casino in a vacuum, or is it going to always and rightly be compared to its predecessor?
I think you can. I mean, because they're different stories, right? They're different films, but even still, there's this. It's like how he structures the films. It's very similar. It's like you mentioned, right? The same writers, the same actors. He uses voiceover in both of them. Like even here on the podcast, it's like there's a reason why we talk about these two together versus like other two films together. They're obviously very similar, but but I do think that there are big differences between the two films, and I think almost most notably the story arc of both films is drastically different, I think.
Yeah, the stylistic similarities are kind of hard to get past. Like you said, cast, director, writer, in terms of screenplay and source material, the subject matter, the voiceovers, there's so much. It becomes inextricable, but they really are a dyad of movies. And I sort of had to remind myself when I was watching that, because if you consider them that way, it becomes a little easier to swallow the similarities, because otherwise it's really hard not to see Casino as derivative, or I guess more accurately, just repetitive, because beyond the people, beyond the milieu, there's still more shared DNA here, isn't there?
Yeah, I think even just talking about it now, there's you have similar character, you have the actors, like you said, even the sort of the side characters, the Frank Vincents of the world, and just these random side characters that are sort of familiar with us already when we get into Casino. But it's I think the heart of the film, and I think the heart of both films, not necessarily in heart in a good way, but just
not like Fellowship heart. It's not.
That's right. Correct.
This is not Sam and Frodo.
This is De Niro and Pesci, and I think it's Pesci, right? I think he is the heart of the film, and when the heart of the film is say what you will, the Tommy and the Nicky characters are very similar.
They are,
and so I don't think it's much of a stretch, and there's a reason I think he got the Oscar nomination, or he won the Oscar for Goodfellas, but then he didn't even get nominated for Casino.
Yeah, because we've seen it at that point. We've seen it, and this is the disadvantage that the second film will have. And it would be one thing if it were a continuation. If this were an actual sequel, I think it could be seen differently. Obviously, that would be impossible given the the ending of Goodfellas. You couldn't really have that as a sequel,
right?
But yeah, it's a little tougher for people to disentangle them and remove their kind of. It's not fatigue, because I still enjoy seeing it, but I don't think you can honor it in the same way, because we've seen it, and so it's fairly or not. I think it's correct to maybe look at Casino, or at least the performance of Pesci in that way.
There's something we discussed last week of Raging Bull, and Scorsese continues his theme here of sin through indulgence, and that's kind of one of the main similarities I feel in this film when it comes to the story or the theme. In the case of Goodfellas and Casino, it's a case of indulgence of money and drugs, and you could say sex too, because Henry Hill and the Nicky character in Casino are both adulterers and sort of make poor decisions when it comes to women. But as Frankie, there's that moment where Frankie takes over the voiceover, and he says, because there's one thing that the old timers don't like, and they don't like anyone fucking around with the other guy's wives. It's bad for business.
That's right.
Which is which is great. And it's when these characters overindulge to the point of you're causing sin, I guess, but it's when the moment of when the drugs get introduced, I think. Specifically for Scorsese, this is something he keeps going back to is cocaine, and the use of cocaine, and I think it's something that he is familiar with, and it's being that he was essentially a drug, almost OD'd, and was in the hospital right before he shot Raging Bull. He was a crazy drug addict, and I think being a good Catholic boy, he overindulged, and he's trying to repent for that sin in his head, and that's why he sort of keeps bringing these ideas up, and he does it later in Wolf of Wall Street as well. But our main characters in both films, they suffer from this craving and desire for more, and that's what hinders all their choices, and that's what, you know, eventually messes up their head and the outcomes of the film.
Yeah, everyone does seem to have that vice or sin or flaw that does lead them astray. You know, Sam and Ginger.
Yeah.
They both kind of have blind spots where another person is concerned. Like Sam is the ultimate pragmatist. But he is emotionally compromised when it comes to Ginger. And there's that line, you know, like, for a guy who likes sure things, I was about to bet my life on a long shot. And Ginger herself, she has a similar defect where she can't move on from Lester, you know, the James Woods character, her one-time pimp / boyfriend, who has obviously manipulated her into emotional dependency with years of parasitic abuse. So we can see that sin and flaw and vice can take myriad forms in these films. It doesn't have to be drugs. It can be people as just as potently.
Yeah, and we see it in Goodfellas, right? The Henry Hill is, I would say Karen is sort of similar in this sense that, like, when she's talking about in her voiceover that she's like, there was something about him. She's like, when he, that violent scene, he goes and beats the neighbor up. She's like, any of my girlfriends would have like turned and run, but if she's like, it turned me on. And it's like, that's when we know she's in it. She is in it for real. But the 100%. Karen voiceover, this is interesting because they're both films, they use voiceover, right? And the narrators kind of switch throughout. And I thought that was interesting, but I would also say that it helps it feel more real. Usually sometimes when you hear a voiceover, you're like, it'll take you out of the film or be like, oh, this is like, you know, but how Scorsese uses it makes it almost feel like a documentary. Like there's this, he's describing obviously what he's seen on film, and he's filling us in on this life that we're not a part of, both in Casino and in Goodfellas. And Goodfellas, it's like, this is how they run scams. This is how they rob people. Casino, it's like, this is how they rob the casino. This is how they get money back to the bosses. And like, this is how the casinos are run. And that with a couple of moments, like the small scenes. I keep coming back to like this, the scene where, like the blueberry scene in Casino, or the I amuse you scene in Goodfellas. Like, well, I'm here to fucking amuse you. I'm a clown. I'm here to amuse you. Oh, he's a big boy. He knows what he said. Like those scenes are they're like snippets of moments in time, right? The blueberry scene. It's like, it seems so insignificant. Kind of when you talk about the scene, it's like, oh, he's complaining that there's not enough blueberries in his muffin. But it's like those moments, it's like, yeah, the Latamza's heist and the murdering of characters and Casino, whatever, like those big moments happen and you're like, holy God. But like, it's those small, insignificant scenes, seem insignificant, that give it an authenticity and makes it feel real.
Yeah, I think that changing of narration too also demands that we think about perspective. And that's important too. You know, point of view matters, and they both force us to consider differences and similarities between things. And one of them, you know, I think they parallel the organized crime, politics, and business, and how they all kind of perform the same function with differing methods. You know, like the social contract that underpins government is protection for money. That is the most fundamental, you know, aspect of the relationship between citizen and government. And that's the main thing that Polly does, and what like a lot of what mobs do in Goodfellas and in Casino. So you pay your taxes to the government, or you pay tribute to the boss, and they'll defend you from other people who would basically try to do the same thing to you. And, you know, Sam notes on several occasions how the legitimate casino business is inherently criminal. You know, they are built to take people's money, you know, albeit in a more pleasurable way than being straight up mugged. But ultimately, this is a more pernicious form of crime, since a mugger can really only take what you have on you. The casino can drain your savings account, and yet somehow, you know, dressed up in these trappings, it all becomes legal. You know, it's a beautiful thing. It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it's all a scam, right? And everyone is in on it. But, you know, like they say in both films, it's like, we had it all. And it's like, Henry says is at the end, and he's like, sort of when he's breaking the fourth wall and talking directly to the audience. And then, and I can't remember when they say it in Casino when he says like, we had it all and we all fucked it up, or it's like, it's the last time street guys would ever be given an opportunity like this again. Right.
Yeah.
But that's the interesting thing about Casino is like, it shows this underworld. It shows this like scamming happening, but then at the very end, it's sort of like he puts it back on the audience and it's like, well, like the way that Las Vegas is now. Yeah. Okay. You're like, as exactly what you said, it's not the mob that's ripping you off, but it's the corporations. It's like which is worse, right?
Well, that's right. Yeah. And another thing that struck me in both films was, and I don't know if this was an intention by the film or just sort of my reading, but like there's this real lack of awareness with the wise guy. And, it doesn't really just apply to a gangster, but this is any obnoxious or self-absorbed person. Like this is people at the gym who bring portable speakers with them. There's no, they don't have the capacity, it seems, to imagine if everybody else did the same thing. If everyone played music out loud in a small space, or if everybody was trying to constantly rob or extort everyone else, life would be hell. Like the wise guy, particularly Henry, he seems to think there's something novel or even noble about what they do, but they're really just assholes. But they look down on like the, schmucks who work everyday jobs for peanuts. But like, there's not this understanding that like you need that in order for you to do what you do. And if there was no polite society, what would you live outside of? And I don't know. It shouldn't be surprising that mobsters are lack self-awareness or objectivity. But I don't know. That just struck me in both movies. It was kind of a weird thing.
Person in the gym playing music. It's like that person on a phone call that has it on speaker and it's just walking.
Oh yeah, walking around.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
What are you doing?
The worst,
yeah,
Jerry. I would rather live next door to live next door to Tommy DeVito than someone who does that, quite honestly.
Yeah, I mean they are assholes, man. But I think that's established from the start, right?
Sure.
I don't think we care, and I don't think we care that they're assholes, because we sort of know.
No, in fact, it makes them interesting in some ways. That's what makes them exciting and fun.
And we feel like at least with Sam Rothstein and Henry Hill, there seems to be some sort of like, they're both criminals, but they're not as bad as some of the people, i.e. Tommy and Nikki, that in the Joe Pesci characters in the both films. Like they're not as bad as that. But I think about the moments of the opening moment of Goodfellas, right? And it's like it starts you off on a roller coaster, and it's like you hear that voice over line that says like, as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. And right after that, we see that and it's like this is right after they stabbed a guy in the trunk. This is the first 2 minutes of the film. We, he thrusts down the trunk of the car, and then we're off, and we're like, the music hits, that big bang nostalgic music. I want to raise to riches, and it's just like music hits, and it's like, whoa, this is such a cool way to start a film. You want to be, and it's like there's this nostalgic feel to the film. There's just this like, I'm going to like. This is going to be almost like a fun ride. That's how the film sort of starts with me, even though you sort of forget very quickly that it's like, oh shit, they were just stabbing this guy in a trunk, because it kind of flashes back to him as this kid and this music happening. Now counter that with how Casino starts. And this is where like we'll start talking about some of the differences between the film. This Casino starts on paper, when you look at it, very similar, with the voiceover of Sam saying, when you love someone, you've got to trust them. There's no other way. You need to give them the key to everything that's yours. Otherwise, what's the point? And for a while, I believed that I had that kind of love. And you're like, okay, this is like a love story. And then the explosion of the car happens, and then this operatic music happens. It's very different. This is like Scorsese's brilliant use of music, right? It's like he's not bringing back this nostalgic big band, whatever feel. It's like this operatic, like, and you see him, this tumbling figure falling through, like, you know, like this red, almost like the backdrop of the lights of Vegas. That's very similar to, like, you know, like chaos and like hell and explosion. And you're like, oh, wait, there's this tragic feel right off the bat. And then, you know, okay, this is not going to end well. Like, you know, this, but, you know, some would say that you know, so you have sort of like this hopeful feeling at the beginning of Goodfellas that ends up turning at the very end, sort of to this tragic ending. Whereas Casino sort of starts at this tragic place. You know that something tragic is going to happen, and it sort of does, but he sort of ends up in this sort of content place. Not like a happy ending, but like seems like he's sort of content in his life. So, you know, there's that.
Yeah, you mentioned that to me earlier this week, and I hadn't fully put my finger on it, but you're right. There is a coming of age innocence, particularly at the beginning of Goodfellas. That's really endearing, really, really endearing, and fun too. And it's even there when he's doing things like committing arson, which I think is impressive for a film to be able to do, to make you feel charmed by like a 14-year-old setting shit on fire and, you know, blowing up cars and stuff like that. You know, Goodfellas becomes cynical as part of the maturation of its lead character, whereas Casino is immediately cynical. And the portion of good times in the movie, I think, is comparatively less. There's way more fun, I think, in Goodfellas. And maybe this is part of what contributes to how it's viewed by history, you know, is that there is more fun and I think more memorable moments in Goodfellas. Would you agree?
Yeah, the memorable. So, like, when I think about Goodfellas and I think about memorable moments, I think about two things. Or two scenes, I should say. Think about the Copacabana scene where Henry and Karen go in through the kitchen, and it's a long tracking shot, which is like amazing. And this is like a cinematography 101. And it's like, how does Scorsese do this? How does he create this shot? It's just like the music, how he's interacting with everybody. Just iconic movie making. And then I also think about and I mentioned it earlier, but the funny how scene, right? Everybody sort of thinks about that scene where they're at the bar and you know, Pesci and Henry Hill, or I guess it's Tommy and Henry Hill are sort of going back at one another, which was apparently an improv. It was actually the Joe Pesci was actually telling a story like that actually happened to Joe Pesci, and then when they were working through it in rehearsals, and then they added it to the script, and you know, and how the editing of that scene is just so brilliant. And it's like, how do you shooting back and forth? You only have two cameras, medium shots, so they're not close-ups, so you're not getting this intense, and you're seeing the other guys around, you're seeing how they're reacting to this like switch on a dime that Tommy has. Funny how, and it's like, oh god, this is all these guys think this is real, this is what's happening, this can happen in this scenario, this is not uncommon to these sort of guys switching on a dime and being absolute lunatics. But like knowing the perfect timing of when to cut, how long to hold on. I know that the editor and Scorsese, they like milliseconds, like frames, figuring out the perfect time to cut, to hold on Henry just long enough so that you build that and get the fuck out of here. I fucking had you. And it's like, because he wants to have the audience too. So it's these like brilliant, like elegant beauty, stylistic shots and scenes that play back versus Casino. For me anyway, when I think about Casino, the first scenes I'm thinking about, head in a vice, buried alive. Like those are the two scenes that sort of stick out. So it's just like, you know, that's not to say there aren't like really amazing shots in the whole film, because there are, but like, it's sort of like difference between like Elegant and Beauty stylistically in Goodfellas versus like horrid acts of violence, sort of masked by these bright lights of Las Vegas or of the casino sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think those are the ones that stick with me too in terms of Casino. I remember the Vice, Nicky stabbing the guy with the pen, Nicky getting beaten to death with the aluminum bat. And maybe that tells us something about the two films and why people prefer Goodfellas. But, you mentioned earlier, I also never forget the blueberry muffin scene or the end sequence of Casino. Yep. In fact, both films, the ending and the final narration that we get is really significant and once again sort of similar. We talked about it, with the end of Raging Bull, and there seems to be in both of these movies a sense of regret and maybe a sense of inevitability to all three of them, really.
Yeah, I think that the regret that we see in Henry and Sam, and how both stories sort of like where they started, and I sort of mentioned this earlier, right, where there's this feeling of like Goodfellas, maybe there is a happy ending here, but like Henry's ending is just so depressing. Like he even says it. He's breaking the fourth wall, walking out of the courtroom, and he's like, and that was it. And now I got to go live like a schmuck. Like, he's like, I got to order spaghetti. I got egg noodles and ketchup. And it's like, this is like, what's worse, getting whacked or living this life. Right. That he's pretty much comparing the two of them, right? Like he says they're very similar versus, so he kind of goes from this like potential, like you see, and it's because we see this early life too, and like his growth, and he's going up and up and up, and then obviously the bad decisions he makes as a character. But then like the Sam Rothstein character doesn't really change a lot, right? He just sort of like goes through a bunch of shit, and then he sort of comes out clean on the other side. And he's like, and then at the end of the day, I was, essentially picking games. It's like where he started, just picking games, and that's what he was good at, and that's where he ends.
Yeah, it's almost like they both sort of end where they begin. Henry is back to being a nobody. Sam is back to picking games, and there's this idea too that like fair. Henry sort of ends in hell. He's in hell at the end of the movie, whereas Sam goes through hell during the main body of the film, only to get back to, I guess, real life or I don't know, something that isn't quite hell. And there's even imagery to kind of support that. Like you mentioned it with the beginning. Like we're meant to see that we think Sam gets blown up at the beginning of the film, and through the opening credits, you see his silhouette falling through flames and through these disorienting lights of Vegas, and as though he was descending through hell. The music contributes to that as well. Actually, like we hear the St. Matthew Passion by J.S. Bach, and it's an oratorio that details the final stages of the life of Christ. His betrayal by Judas, the Last Supper, his arrest, crucifixion, and finally the sealing of his tomb. So, pretty clear comparison being made there in terms of people's ordeals. And there's even a few references to Las Vegas as paradise to sort of continue the biblical comparison. And there's an admission from Sam and even Nicky to a degree that they ruined paradise. Their sins got them kicked out of Eden, and now it's a Disney nightmare run by the corporations. And I think I like that about Casino, that Sam does take a certain amount of responsibility for the loss. Even though it's hard for me to be sympathetic towards either of these guys and the things that they regret losing, it doesn't seem like Henry shares in the culpability for what's happened all that much, to the extent that Sam does. And it doesn't really bother me that Henry has to wait in line like a schnook and can't find a good marinara sauce. And it doesn't bother me so terribly that, the dealers don't remember my drink in Vegas. Like these are small tragedies at best. But when you set them to music like Layla or House of the Rising Sun, I think it makes, it does help to make them sympathetic. And you can't help but be moved by these endings and the eventual fate of these guys.
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of brought up music there. It's that Layla sequence in Goodfellas. That's sort of another memorable moment where he's kind of describing all the people getting whacked after the Lufthansa robbery, which is another interesting thing where it's like that is the biggest heist in American history up until that point. And, and they never show it. Like this, when it happens, it's like a scene of Henry in the shower being like, "You fucking did it." And it's like, that's such an interesting way to kind of broach that. But like as you were saying with the music choices, I mean, this is the classic Scorsese. He just has such a great affinity for music in his films, and just like when to choose them. I'll tell you about my favorite shot. I've told you this like 3 times now. My favorite shot or scene, I think, in any film ever. It's up there. This is up there, and it's the scene in Goodfellas when De Niro is at the bar and he is getting hounded by Maury, the guy who sets up the heist. And it's
the wig salesman,
bald guy, the wig salesman. And he's like, "I want my fucking money. Yeah, fuck him. I wanted my money." And Henry sort of talks to him and he's like, "All right, go." And he's like, "Listen, you got to stop busting balls." And he's like, "You'll get your money." And then he starts saying, Henry boy, the pipes are calling." And he sings sort of a Danny Boy because it's an Irish and Henry is half Irish. So he's like, starts singing this iconic Irish song. And then, so I was like, man, that's so great. And then he comes out. My favorite scene is then De Niro smoking this cigarette. There, and he's like looking at Nikki, and it's just slowed down a tiny bit. He kind of looks up, and it's just one look. The camera's zooming in on him, and in this one look, he's like, what he's gonna do? He's gonna fucking kill Morty. And it's boom, hits "Sunshine of Your Love," and it's like, oh shit, it's on. This is so fucking cool. But I started like. I watched that scene like before this podcast like 5, 6, 7 times. It's only like short, but interesting when Morty's singing Danny Boy, which is like, this is a classic Irish funeral song. So they sing this about Irish funerals all the time. And he's singing, "Oh, Danny Boy." And the line is, the pipes are calling. But then he's walking out. And as Morty walking out, he's keep kind of singing it to himself a little bit. And he says, "Summer's gone and all the roses die." And then it goes, and it's like, if you look at the actual lyrics of Danny Boy, the lyric is, "But when ye come and all the flowers are dying." And then later on in the song, there's the line is something, and all the roses die. So he takes the beginning. I would love to know if this was Scorsese telling him what to say in this moment, or if it was actually sort of like a flub or just a line reading by the Morty. But he essentially combines 2 different parts of the song: "Summer's gone" and "all the roses die," or "all the roses dying." That's what he says in the film, and it's just so poignant and it's so sort of subtle, and you don't really hear it. But that's the moment he's singing, and it's like, this is sort of the switch in the movie again. This is like, summer's gone. So it's like all this fun stuff is happening. And, obviously when you relate something to summer, this is me looking more into it than it probably needs to be looked into, and all the roses die. Everybody's going to start to die. And this is, it's just brilliant. And then he brings in "Sunshine of Your Love," and De Niro gives that look. I just fucking, it's just layers on layers on layers. And, even how De Niro is holding the cigarette, it's just like, it's so fucking cool and smooth. And man, I don't know. I could just keep rambling on about this one shot moment in this film, but I fucking love it.
I do think there's something there, though. Like, I mean, I don't think that the Danny Boy song was chosen by chance, and the fact that it 100%. Sort of presages his death. That's no accident right there. And yeah, no, that is super cool. And the soundtracks in both are just preposterously good. And as great as it is, Casinos might almost be overkill. And it's hard for me to say that, because I do love a good soundtrack that is, heavily used too. I like a lot of music in films. I think that's a really great thing. And there just aren't many moments in Casino without a catchy tune. It's pretty wild, and it's long, of course, naturally. So there's going to be a lot of songs. But this soundtrack is like a double CD with like 20 tracks on each disc. It's big, and you think, I feel like that has sort of become the template now for film soundtrack. And was Scorsese the forerunner of this? Did anything before Goodfellas and obviously Casino thereafter, did anything really rock in the same way and use music as effectively? Like maybe a Vietnam movie, like I don't know, I could think of like Platoon or something like that, but I'm not sure if that does that even predate either of these films. I don't know. Can you think of a soundtrack prior to Goodfellas that really worked as effectively as that one did and rocked as hard?
I mean, there definitely are films. I mean, there's a lot of the movie The Big Chill uses like music.
Oh man,
uses this,
yeah,
yeah. The Big Chill uses, and that's like all Motown stuff, and then obviously musicals and stuff, and like, but like, it's the unique use of specific music at specific times. Like I said,
right.
Like you could do that scene in Goodfellas where he's sort of panning through, and like the Layla's playing, and that moment in Layla at the end where it's this sort of like overture or whatever, and he's going through and showing all these dead bodies. Like you just think about that, those moments showing all the dead bodies, all the gangsters kind of getting killed in the car and put in a freezer, and just kind of like all these murders happening, and like put to like an intense like score or something. Like you would feel so different about it, right? It's just like Scorsese has this knack for figuring out the perfect timing and the perfect use. And this goes back to his, I would say in his early days, like when he did Last Waltz and stuff. And like, he just has an affinity for like blues and old music. And like, he's so familiar with it. Tarantino does this a bit too, right? Like there's moments in like Tarantino's films, like how can you think of Misirlou without thinking of Pulp Fiction, or Stuck in the Middle with You without thinking of Reservoir Dogs? It's like when you use these, it changes how you listen to a song, but it also changes how you interpret a scene. It's brilliant, and it's a driving force throughout the film, right? Because like you said in Casino, it's like almost like nonstop. There's always music. There's always things happening.
Yeah. Yep.
Although the scene when he's when they're in the desert, when Nicky and Sam meet in the desert, it's one of my favorite scenes in the film, where kind of Nicky tells him off. He's like, what are you going over my head with everybody back home? And what the fuck are you doing on TV anyway? Like, it's so like great.
You know how many calls like I get every day? People tell me, what the fuck is Ace doing? You got a cigarette filter and a pink robe. You're like John Barrymore. It's just so good.
Barrymore references.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's another great thing that, we sort of talk about Pesci being interesting because he's very similar in both films. I would argue that like De Niro is so different in both films. He still sort of plays these kind of gangsters, I guess, but like originally he wanted to play, when he read the original script, or when he was like for Goodfellas, he knew he was too old for Henry. It's like a younger Raging Bull era De Niro would have been great for Henry Hill, but like by that point in his career, he was obviously older, and like you needed this young innocence to Henry Hill. But like De Niro is like, I mentioned the scene where he's looking at Morty and he's smoking the cigarette. How he holds a cigarette, it's like he holds it through. Just looking for like a pen, but he's like, it's so interesting because he holds it through, like he holds it like this, right? He's holding it, and it's like that's how he's smoking, and it's like that's obviously a choice. Whereas like Ace in Casino, he's always got it like this. And like you said, he's got a cigarette holder in half the scenes. And he's always wearing kind of flamboyant colors. And there's something, I don't want to say feminine about him, but he's like, it's like he doesn't care. The Sam character doesn't care that Ginger is like cheating on him. with another. What he cares about is how she thinks of him as a fool, and she thinks of him as an idiot. And when she tries to play him as an idiot, that's when he gets most offended. And he's like, he's like, even if he wants, even if he buys a suit, what he thinks is a good suit, that's only going to cost $2,000. He's doing all the math in his head, and he's pissed at her because she's plays him for a fool. Not that she's like cheating on him. Even when he finds out about Nikki, he's like, I hope it's not somebody who I think it is. It's like, and that would kind of, I don't think that the, Jimmy Conway would be going for that in Goodfellas.
Yeah. And I think he's also disappointed that she's sort of let herself down in a way too, because he's like, the Ginger I know wouldn't even look at this clown Lester, she's way too smooth, way too cool to be taken herself, because she's really being manipulated by him and controlled by him. And that's not the Ginger he knows. The Ginger he knows is in control. And that's the Ginger he fell in love with. So to see her debased in that way by being subservient to this gross friggin' scumbag who's just a sack of crap, I think that's what hurts him more than anything. But like talking about Sharon Stone, man, she was an absolute revelation in this for a lot of people. And I guess they didn't catch her in Total Recall, because I think she was tremendous there. And I think I seriously do. And I think she showed capacity in that for roles like this one. But for a lot of people, Casino was her transitionary role, from just another pretty face in Hollywood to a seriously great actor. And she's unspeakably good in this. And as we mentioned, the only person to get an Oscar nom. I think De Niro and Pesci are characteristically great, but neither one, particularly Pesci, like we've said a few times now, is notably different from their Goodfellas counterpart. Like I know, Sam Rothstein and Jimmy Conway are different guys, but it's still sort of this, he's still tough. He's still no nonsense. The way he goes about his business is a little different. And, obviously he has the trappings of a dandy, Sam begins to sort of, take on that persona, but he's still hard. He's still a hard dude. And he's still no one that you are going to get anything past. So I think fundamentally they're kind of the same character, even though their traits manifest in different ways.
Yeah. Sharon Stone is just so, you need somebody that can, like you said, show off this cool, cocky, I don't want to say arrogance, but just confidence. But then also needs to be gosh, that moment when her and Sam, where she sort of is high, and it's the morning after, and it's after she's, goes to Nikki's restaurant, and she's, stealing, I guess essentially getting the money out of the safe and leaving Sam for good. It's like she is on another level. She's and it's never, it is over the top, like this in story wise, it's over the top, but it never feels like, oh, this is unbelievable, or this doesn't feel real. You're oh man, this is hard to watch because it does feel so believable, right? And then when you see kind of that tragic downfall at the end, where you just see her in this disgusting hotel lobby, this countering to where we first see her, where she's on the floor of a casino, running the show, and throwing the things up, and that music hits. That I forget the song. Was it the song that plays when she throws all that she's thrown in? It's whatever. It's a needle drop moment, and it's oh fuck, this it's such a tragic downfall. The Pesci, we mentioned it earlier. That's probably why he didn't get a nomination for Casino, because we'd seen it before in Goodfellas, but that doesn't take away the fact from how good it was, and he was good enough that he got the Oscar. And I don't know if you've ever seen the Oscar speech, but it is the shortest Oscar speech of all time. And it's literally really? Him going up. He gets up and he walks up, and the only thing he says is, it's my privilege. Thank you. And he walks off, and it's man, how gangster is that?
Take notes, people. So cool. Take notes. That's how you accept an award. Brevity is really key. Well done, Joe. Well done.
Absolutely. It was so fucking boss and cool, and it was like, man, what a legend.
We should. Yeah. I'd love to see that juxtaposed with the Matthew McConaughey. I'm chasing three men. Like you remember, like when he won the oh man, that was brutal. Like I like McConaughey, but man, that was an absolute train wreck. I friggin' hated every second of that speech. But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, like you said, man. Sometimes less is more.
Yes.
Okay, so
for sure.
So we've been pretty concise here. I think in our conversations about the two movies in comparison to each other, and but I am interested to see how you're going to broach my question of, is Goodfellas and Casino both hell of a pictures? One of them hell of a picture, one of them not a hell of a picture. Is one of them higher, or how do you want to broach this?
Yeah, it's before watching these this week, I had the feeling that whichever one I watched second would be at a disadvantage. And we talked about the historical, disadvantage that the Casino was at. And so ultimately I decided to watch them chronologically. And I felt that was the better to understand them historically. And so going in, I remembered liking Casino better. That was what I remembered. And I think that's because growing up, I saw Casino before Goodfellas. I didn't see them as they came out, obviously, because it was 1990. I was 6 years old and no one was going to let me watch Goodfellas. So with these being so similar in content and mechanics, and because I had no choice but to watch them in short order, I don't think it was possible for me to disentangle myself from both when trying to assess one. And I think Casino pales a little bit as a result. And I'm having trouble reconciling the notion that both of these can be a hell of a picture, because if two things do the same thing and one does it better, what does that say about the second? And, I don't think it's through any fault of Casino's other than for it being derivative of its predecessor. But there's good reasons for them to be similar. Like, they are a dyad of films. We talked about this. And so maybe I shouldn't judge it too harshly, but in the same token, maybe they didn't have to be exactly the same. Maybe you didn't have to use the voiceover, and maybe you didn't have to have exactly the same people, like The Departed, which, came out years later, obviously, but it managed to be different and at least feel different. And I think Casino could have too if it tried, but it didn't. And I don't know. I will say right now, my feeling is that Goodfellas is better. But in 5 years, when I watch Casino by itself, I may change my mind on that. I think you can say that both of these are a hell of a picture. But today, I will say that Casino is the better of the two.
You mean Goodfellas is the better of the two?
Excuse me, Goodfellas is the better of the two. Thank you. I ruined my whole speech.
And with that, I totally negate everything I said.
Take two. Cut. I'll pick it up from The Departed. Hang on.
That's right. Yeah. So yeah, I get what you're saying, man. All that makes sense to me. I rewatch these movies a lot more than you do. I think I at least rewatch them once a year. These are some of my go-tos when I'm like, oh, I want to throw something on that I've watched 1,000 times. It's going to be Goodfellas. It's going to be Casino. Those are like up there for me. So without a doubt, for me, both of these are hell of a pictures. No doubt. But like we were sort of talking about earlier, and like you mentioned, it's like, how are they in comparison to one another? And similarly to you, I saw Casino first, and I liked Casino more when I first saw it. I thought it was raw and gritty, and it was the first time I'd really seen like a mafia movie. I saw it like before I saw Godfather and all those sort of movies. Mm-hmm. It was really my kind of introduction back when I was a teenager to this. And so then when I went back and watched Goodfellas, I was like, oh, this is sort of more nostalgic and whatever. But over the years, I've come to like really fall in love with Goodfellas. And, like I said, there's a beauty and elegance to the filmmaking of that. And there's a more grittiness to Casino that kind of makes me feel a bit not in a bad way, but like dirtier watching it. You know what I mean? Like when I'm watching the head vice scene, or I'm watching a guy getting stabbed with a pen, or I'm watching Ace and Ginger like violently scream at each other, "Yo, fucking bitch!" And she's like, ah, she's screaming. It's like it's more. Even though there are uncomfortable moments in Goodfellas, you know, they're going to jail, and he's talking about all the stuff they're doing, and like, how am I gonna? He's finally slicing garlic, and it's
like, right.
Razor
blade shaved garlic.
I want to go to jail. You hang out with your buddies, play cards, drink. It's like, this is the best. You know, so I think in the end, Goodfellas has, again, I'm sort of this sucker for nostalgia and this nostalgic feel when it comes to films. And, you know, that goes back to watching movies that I love from my youth and from my childhood. But then also when a film doesn't, when a film like presents this idea of nostalgia, I'm a sucker for it. And I think Goodfellas does that much more than Casino does. So in the tiers of hell of a pictures, Goodfellas is certainly above it for me. But man, Casino, it has its moments, and it is really great. And I'm really glad we did a double feature where we did them both together.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what? I think I have to say too, I think I like the story of Casino better. Even just conceptually, like I like the historical significance of Casino. Like it's sort of a larger, more broadly impactful idea of the mob's influence on Vegas and stuff like that. And I think it does do certain things better. You know, maybe it's a bit long, but I don't know. I think there are things to prefer in Casino over Goodfellas. I think it just comes down to really what you like and maybe just order of release that really sort of is what influences the cultural opinion. But undoubtedly, both great movies, and I really enjoyed talking about them as a pair. And maybe that's something we can do going forward. You know, sometimes we'll have a special episode where we do a double feature. You know, I always like a double feature as a in terms of like, you know, watching movies. Maybe not ones quite so long as this, and maybe with a longer break in between. But a double feature was always a fun thing to do as a movie goer, and now as movie discussers, I guess, as our movie podcasters, whatever our title might be, I think it could be a fun thing to do as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this was a great exercise in comparing two and sort of sticking to them as companion pieces, but then also kind of looking at the differences. I think it works. But you know, talking about longer films, Scorsese, they've sort of given him the keys. Netflix has certainly with his last two films and been like, go to town, make it as long as you want. So he made The Irishman, you know, a few years ago, and that's what we're diving into this week, next week. So when we talk about like movies that are shorter or wanting to do, you know, this one is longer. I don't know. I think this comes in at 3:30, just under 3.5 hours. I think. Yeah. Oh, so it's a long run time, but it's a culmination of a lot of things. It's a culmination of you know, these three careers that we've been talking about: Pesci, De Niro, and Scorsese, and sort of where they're at, and the idea of mob movies, specifically with what Scorsese's done. And it's an interesting story, and again, it's based on a true story. And yeah, it's going to be fun. I haven't rewatched The Irishman. I think I watched it last year, but you've never seen it, correct?
No, I have not. I remember, you know, considering it on a few occasions, and you know, whatever kept me from doing it. I don't know if it was fatigue or just, you know, like I knew I wasn't going to be able to get through it, so I sort of put it off. And I'm glad now that there is a demand for me to do it, because, you know, I'm sure it deserves to be watched, and certainly as part of this quartet, it has to be watched. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Exactly. Have you watched Killers? Killers of the Flower Moon?
No, I've not.
It's another long one, but there's a few filmmakers that I'll rip the cord and like, not rip the cord, but like I'll be sure to go to see a film. I try to go to the movies as often as I can. It's hard to make time now with young kids and stuff, but there are there are a handful of filmmakers that I'll still go opening weekend to their movies, and Scorsese is one of them. So I saw both Flowers and Irishman in theaters on opening weekend. So but that's worth watching too if you have again a long time. But like the performances in that and the sort of storytelling is pretty incredible. So, but we're not going to talk about Flowers now. We might down the line dive into it, but
certainly. I want to see it. I want to see it. So I'd love to talk about it for sure.
There's no shortage of movies, man. That's for sure. So
thank God.
But next week we'll talk about The Irishman, and we'll sort of conclude our little run of Scorsese, De Niro, Pesci movies, and we'll see where we jump off from there. But back to one movie next week, because we can't do Irishman and Killers in the same week because it's too long. 7 hours of watching a movie and then writing about it and researching it, and it's a lot of time. All right, so it is. Okay, so for David Hollinshurst, my name is Andrew Bartlett, and this has been another episode of Hell of a Picture.